Hello, everybody. Greetings from London. Welcome to this Young China Watchers panel on educational cooperation between the V4 countries and China, which has become a real controversy for us to explore and talk about today in light of recent events in Budapest and Hungary. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Yip. I'm co-head of the Young China Watchers branch in London. And for those of you that don't know YCW, we're a network of students and professionals focused on facilitating constructive dialogue on China's evolving role in the world and cultivating the next generation of thought leaders on China. We're present in 10 cities in 8 countries and have a presence online through our webinars, our podcasts, and articles. Now, about today's event, which is, as I say, on V4, this panel discussion is part of YCW's V4 series, or the Visegrad 4 series, which amplifies the often overlooked Visegrad 4 countries in the discussion around China in Europe and China's influence in the Central Eastern European region. And so for those of you unfamiliar with the V4 concept, just one more time, its members are Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia. So what have you tuned into today exactly? Well, you're tuned into a panel that has as its mission today an examination of China's relationship with V4 through the lens of educational cooperation, be that through university programs, satellite campuses, Confucius Institutes. And that's because today we know that education raises serious and contentious questions for politics, for China scholars, and exactly what has been going on in Budapest in light of Fudan University's expansion plans is one of the reasons why we're talking about this subject today. So by using this perspective, it's my hope that we can have a deep dive in the current situation in Budapest involving Fudan, but also broaden out, zoom out to the conversation to the V4, to Europe, and ultimately reflect on what we want the present and the future of educational cooperation with China to look like. And so to that end, I've called upon a group of 3 recognized experts and practitioners in this area who work at the cutting edge of this field. They are Andrea Braun Střelcová, Dominik Mierzejewski, and Tamás Matura. So without further ado, I'm again delighted to have our 3 excellent speakers with us today. And I'm now going to read out, I'll start a question, which is, what forms of cooperation currently exist between your country and China? And can you tell us about any changes that you've observed over the past 5 years or so? What have been the key changes? And Andrea, if it's okay, I'd love to hear your thoughts from your perspective in Germany. Over to you, Andrea.
Thanks a lot, Michael, and thanks again for your invitation. I've been to some really great Young China Watchers events, so it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you today from a speaker's point of view. As you said, I'm sitting in Germany, although I'm from the Czech Republic, and I am doing research on higher education and science policy, but I also have work experience as a professional in the field, so international cooperation officer and higher education project manager. So I'm sort of blending, the sort of practitioner's perspective with the research perspective. And what I'm going to say right now partially is coming from research, but most of it is actually coming from my own experience, and so it somehow covers my perceptions as well as some data. So when it comes to the Czech Republic, the cooperation with China in education, higher education, and also research has expanded massively in the last 5 to 10 years. However, from a very, very, very low base. We are latecomers when it comes to cooperation, really. And the numbers that we are handling, that we were talking about, sort of the magnitude of cooperation that we're talking about, is not really comparable with big, EU member states such as Germany, France, but also the Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, and some other EU member states. So when it comes to the cooperation forms, I mean, they are, on the intergovernmental level. So there are bilateral level intergovernmental agreements on education and on science and technology. When it comes to China, Czech Republic actually has a really, really old agreement on cultural exchanges that has a culture that somehow specifies the exchange of students that actually dates back to 1957. So, back at the time when we were a communist country. So it's one of the oldest agreements. We also have a bilateral agreement on science and technology, which is relatively new, 2016. So you can also see, when we actually began to pay attention to these issues, only 2016. Of course, the education agreement, the bilateral education agreement on cultural exchange is nothing special, really. I mean, we have one, every country has one. with, you know, any other country in the world. I mean, name it, Zimbabwe, North Korea, South Korea, you name it, you know, it's very common, right? But about the Czech Republic, higher education is for free when you study in Czech, that is. But recently, universities in the Czech Republic have started to open also English taught programs. And on these programs, they can actually charge tuition fees. So, you know, incoming students have also become a source of revenue. And here it's really where Czech universities really fall into the global trends in higher education, okay, which are four in the 21st century. Number one, it's marketization, okay? Universities are turning into corporations, and that is the case all over the world. It's very strongly visible, especially in the UK, in the European context. But this is the case really happening everywhere, meaning universities are adopting a management style, administration style, you know, they have marketing departments, they have fundraising departments, they have student services, and so on, that are professionalized in a rather, you know, corporate way. So, you know, universities used to be very, you know, much more about teaching and research. This is a sort of classical European university. But now, you know, they also are doing so much more than that. Societal engagement is also very important for universities, but what's important to realize is that now they're raising money, not just for public sources, even if it's a public institution, also from private sources. And they much more resemble a professional corporation than they used to. And this is a matter of debate, but this is the trend. A sort of academic capitalism, okay? Number two is higher education has become massified, right? So it used to be a thing for the elite of the society, but in line with sociological theories of education, higher education is changing from something for the elite to something for the masses, and then later on something universal. So you can also see it in the number of students, which is rising, especially in China, has expanded. So the number of the student body in China has expanded in the last couple of decades massively. And this is the sort of market of the student that is then feeding into the international universities across the world, including the Czech Republic. The third trend is internationalization. Again, this is a process that's integrating international, intercultural dimensions into higher education, into the teaching, into the curriculum. Academic mobility has become a norm for students and for teachers. So to set up international partnerships and projects and programs and double degrees or joint degrees or research initiatives is something that every university all around the world is doing, including in the Czech Republic. And last one is digitalization. And this one is the most important because right now during Corona, you know, the transition to hybrid modes of learning and so on. So all these trends, you know, they're visible also in Czech Republic and China. The number of Chinese students in the Czech Republic is actually quite low. As I said, we were starting from a very low base. So just 10 years ago, I checked the stats, just 10 years ago, there were less than 100 Chinese students studying in the Czech Republic. Today, that is 2019, before Corona, the number stood at 792, okay? So the numbers are very small when you compare it, you know, to the student bodies in UK, but also in Germany or France. But as I say, it has grown from a low base, but it has grown a lot. So I think that for the beginning, that would be it for me. Unfortunately, what higher education is always an issue is the lack of data. Okay, we have numbers, we have student numbers, but what we don't have is the number of research partnerships. What we don't have is the number of inter-university agreements, because this is definitely where the largest bulk of agreement lies. It's not within the intergovernmental agreements, but within the universities themselves. And again, every university in this world today has hundreds of such agreements. And so also Czech universities have quite naturally grown the number of partnerships with their Chinese counterparts, as well as with other regions in the world, particularly Russia, India, but also the Middle East. But I would also like to point out at the fact that we are an EU member state, and in higher education and research and innovation, the EU level really matters. So there is a lot of funding that goes into it from the EU, and there's also a lot of agreements on the EU level that regulate higher education and research funding and policy. So I think this is something that we should not be forgetting, because we are really embedded in a larger framework here. And of course, higher education is a national, it's in the competency of the national state, but nonetheless, there's a lot that is happening on the EU level that also influences us. So that's going to be it from me from now.
Thanks so much for that intro, Andrea. And what I get from that is that the relationship, the cooperation starts from a low base, but it's professionalizing. it's commercializing and it's deepening. And I now want to turn to Dominik and ask whether from his experience and what he's seen in his long career in China scholarship, whether it's something similar, something different. Over to you, Dominik.
Well, to be honest, I can repeat what was said a minute ago, which is the word by word, but let me offer kind of, all right, probably no. Well, let me offer a very, a very small perspective compared to what was said a minute ago. The form of cooperation with China, at least in my case, have like 3 levels. The very first level is 2+2. It's quite popular across Europe, and at the University of Łódź, we managed to have a 2+2 with Zhengzhou. I believe it's quite popular, at least for now. We have 40 to 50 students per year from Zhengzhou University studying here in my city. And what is very interesting, we're discussing the state-to-state relationship, state-to-state agreements in higher education. However, the cooperation of 2+2 in economy brought central government from Poland and provincial level government from Henan province to sign a joint agreement in education, in higher education. So from the practical angle, from the practical reasoning, in case of Poland at least, we see that first we have cooperation and then we upgrade this cooperation into the national level. So it's a very Chinese approach, I would say. The second, a very small workshops that my unit has with Nankai University, Chou Enlai School of Government. As you said, I'm working on China local governments, and Nankai University is one of the leading unit dedicated to China's local reforms. That's why we have, at least for now, pandemic stops us. We had 2 workshops, one in Poland, one in China, on local government development, urbanization processes. So this is the second. And the last, I think, quite unique to the degree that we managed to have more than 500 students from China for a summer school program. And I think it's pretty relevant to recognize also the dynamics inside China. I think, at least from my research about local authorities, the horizontal competition is a critical thing when it comes to sending students overseas. And what we learned from the summer school project, that the competition between different universities in China is a key factor in the number of students they send for a summer program. So from my perspective, this is critical issue. And this horizontal competition, it's critical when it comes to, as I said, the number of students sent by universities. So you have to have a lot of networks inside China to have the students here. And the second, Belt and Road. I mean, if you just look into the reality of higher education from this perspective in mainland China, you recognize that Belt and Road initiative serves as a slogan that, that push all university staff to go global and acquire a technology, take technology and so on and so forth. So definitely, I think this is very, very important to recognize. As I said, just to sum up the short intervention, summer schools, bilateral workshops, and 2+2. I think it's quite successful. I mean, in a sense that we have the students, as was said before, we started from a very low level. I mean, both areas, and this is also very important, starts the transformation in late 1980s. I mean, China a little bit earlier in late 1970s. Then the whole Central Europe joined this transformation, and we started this cooperation at very low level. So I will stop here for now.
Dominik, what I'm hearing from you is that these initiatives, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a summer school, they take time to develop. They take resources. It takes goodwill on both sides. And you know, established players, if I can use that word, in the UK, you know, start from that high base, but what you're saying is very much in resonance with what we heard earlier from Andrea, that it takes hard work, and it starts from a comparatively low base, but the numbers are improving, the numbers are growing as years go by. And I want to turn to Tamás, but before I do, I just want to give him special thanks, which I should have mentioned earlier in my introduction, for filling in at such short notice today. Because for those of you that signed up early, you will have noticed that initially on the bill that we had a Professor Hamar from joining us, but unfortunately he's had to drop out at such short notice. So thanks again, Tamás, and you know, given that you're joining us at such short notice, no worries that you may have to leave us a little earlier than anticipated. But please, can I turn to you and also add another question to you, which is, please also in your response tell us a bit about the story that's unfolding in front of our eyes right now in Budapest in relation to this new development regarding Fudan University.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure, and I also have to start with the apology that I will have to leave early, probably in 20 minutes or so, because I have another appointment at 7 o'clock. So very briefly on Hungarian-Chinese educational cooperation, I can be brief because cooperation between the two sides is quite sporadic. So we have approximately, or we used to have around 3,000 Chinese students studying in Hungary before the pandemic, of course. But I have had the impression in the past decade that Hungarian universities are not that interested in attracting Chinese students to the country. There are several reasons for that. We have received many Chinese students already back in the 1990s. As some of you may know, Hungary has been hosting the biggest Chinese community in Central and Eastern Europe, around 30 to 40,000 Chinese in the country. And according to the information I have obtained so far, many universities, I mean Hungarian universities, have had some, well, disappointing experiences with Chinese students. I don't know, how strong these negative feelings are, but so far it seems to me that most of the Hungarian institutions of higher education are not that eager to work together with the Chinese. Of course, there are some examples. Especially because the Hungarian government has been pursuing a very pro-China policy in the past decade. So most of these 3,000 students have arrived to the country with a scholarship offered by the Hungarian state to the Chinese people. Besides that, there are 5 Confucius Institutes in the country, what is, well, quite a big number compared to the size of Hungary. All major cities in the countryside, and of course Budapest itself hosts a Confucius Institute. And in foreign correspondence and foreign critics tend to point to these Confucius Institutes saying that, oh, look at there, that's the pure example of Chinese influence in Hungary and Chinese soft power in the country. Well, actually the reality is quite different, because whenever I talk to my friends working at Confucius Institutes, privately they always admit that, yes, we have around 500 guests, but it's always the very same 500 people. And for example, I'm talking about now of a Confucius Institute at a countryside city of 200,000 people. So their outreach to the wider public is extremely limited. It seems that they are able to attract those who are inherently interested in Chinese affairs and Chinese, culture and Chinese language. And therefore, I don't think that these Confucius Institutes pose any kind of challenge or even threat to the Hungarian national security, as some people tend to point out. So generally speaking, educational cooperation between the two sides is very, very limited. However, the Fudan University, the scandal around the Fudan University issue is something what has finally triggered a public outcry and has triggered public attention towards China, because You know, being a China expert, I have been very, very sad about the fact that in the past decade, I was talking so much about China, but when it comes to, or when it came to the wider public, people were not really interested in China, despite the long story of the 16 or 17+1 cooperation, despite, you know, the very pro-China policies of the Hungarian government. Even opposition parties disregarded China as an important topic. And now, finally and eventually, Fudan, the Hungarian government and the Chinese side were able to trigger that kind of public response. And now everybody talks about China and Chinese influence in Hungary and the future of Sino-Hungarian relations and so on and so forth. So when it comes to the Fudan issue itself, I think it's quite controversial. And it has become quite politicized in the country. So those who favor the Hungarian government, you know, they only see the bright side and they think that, wow, it's the best investment of the century. Meanwhile, those who vote or tend to feel closer to opposition parties, they see Fudan's potential arrival as, you know, evil, malign Chinese influence in the country. Well, the reality is somewhere in between, of course, as always. So I think there are at least 4 dimensions to investigate Fudan's potential arrival to Budapest. The first dimension is the potential impact of Fudan as a university on Hungarian higher education. The second dimension is potential impact of Fudan on, you know, Chinese soft power, whether China is about to spread its ideology in Hungary, as many people are afraid of. The third dimension is national security. Many opposition leaders in Hungary and many, you know, Western partners of our country have been quite explicit about their concerns that China may try to use Fudan as a spying hub or spying HQ in Central and Eastern Europe. And finally, the last dimension is about the financial solution or the financial arrangement surrounding this whole project. So let me start with the first one, Fudan's potential impact on Hungarian higher education. Over there, I see some opportunities and I also see some challenges. So on the one hand, Fudan is about to set up a campus for 6,000 master students. According to some leaked information, the lack of transparency is one of the major problems concerning this issue. So, but based on what we know so far, there would be around 6,000 master level students studying in 4 schools. The first one school focusing on medical studies, another one on economics, the third one on international relations, and the fourth one on technology. So when it comes to, for example, medical studies and technology, I see a lot of opportunities over there. China could bring, let's say, R&D, 5G, 6G, artificial intelligence related research and development into the country. We do need their expertise. We have a huge Huawei complex and center here in Hungary, so they could work together. I see some opportunities over there. When it comes to economics and international relations, I'm not that concerned either, because as many of you may know, Fudan is actually one of the most liberal institutions according to Chinese standards. So I don't expect them to spread, you know, Maoism or Leninism or whatsoever in Hungary. And as actually some of my former students who had the pleasure to study at Fudan University were a little bit disappointed because, as they told me, they expected to learn something very new at Fudan, to learn, you know, some kind of different angle looking at economics or international relations, a different theoretical background. And they were disappointed because they had to listen to mainstream Western liberal schools of thought at Fudan University. So to sum up, when it comes to Fudan as a university, what is one of the best universities of the world, it's a light year ahead in terms of rankings, a light year ahead of any Hungarian universities. I see some opportunities over there. However, there are some challenges as well. The major problem is, and grab your chairs because this is shocking, that Fudan's annual budget is actually more than the total combined budget of all Hungarian universities. So their financial capacity is once again a light year ahead of all Hungarian universities. And that may pose such a challenge to my university, for example, what is the most prominent university in the fields of economics, management, and international studies in the country, that we don't know what to do, how to handle it, this situation. And based on leaked documents, Fudan would offer extremely high salaries to professors. Let me give you some numbers based on the leaked documents. When it comes to, for example, professors of management, the offer for top-ranking professors would be $250,000 a year. Prove me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, 250K would be an extremely high salary even in the United States of America, not to mention the UK or the Western European countries. But even lower-ranking professors would earn $150,000 a year. That is 10 times more than what Hungarian professors earn. So that's a challenge we cannot handle, really. The second dimension, I already shed some light on that, is the question whether China would like to use Fudan as a propaganda tool. I don't really buy that. I don't really think so. First of all, the Chinese are not interested in indoctrinating foreigners. They don't do that even to foreign students studying in China. And I don't think they are interested in indoctrinating Central European students. Second, I don't think they are interested in taking a risk of a major scandal, because can you imagine that enormously high level of scrutiny what Fudan University would receive here in Hungary? America, Western Europe, Hungarian secret services, the media, public discourse, everything would be focusing on the activities of Fudan. And I don't think the Chinese really need a major scandal when, let's say, the Americans can point fingers saying that you say the Chinese use Fudan University as a propaganda tool in Central Europe. That's Chinese malign influence. I don't think the Chinese would take that risk, and they are not interested in that. The third thing is about the national security issue, spying. Well, I can tell you privately that I have had some private conversations with some major Western European countries and major Western countries, and some of them are extremely concerned by this issue, and they say that Fudan's arrival to Budapest may pose a very serious challenge, security challenge to NATO and to Europe itself. And when I responded that, hey, wait a minute, you also have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Chinese students studying at your countries, the response was, you know, in a quite secretive way, the response was that, yes, but our national security agency can track them down. Yours, I mean the Hungarian, cannot. It's, you know, I'm not an expert on this issue, and it's really hard to judge whether they are right or not, or whether they are applying some kind of double standards. But the point is that I don't really think the Chinese need Fudan as a spying hub. Why? Because, as I mentioned that before, there are 30,000, 40,000 Chinese people living in this country. We have major Chinese corporations and banks in this country. We even have a bilingual elementary and secondary school in this country. Why would they need Fudan? Why would they take the risk of a major scandal once again to offer the opportunity to Western Europe or the Americans, pointing fingers that you see the Chinese try to use Fudan Hungary as a spying hub? So what I would like to say about this, that of course, indeed, there is a risk, but I think that risk is manageable, and this is not the most traumatic issue about Fudan. And at last, but absolutely not least, dimension number 4, the financial arrangement. And that is outrageous. That is the problem. I don't know what you know about the details, but as a matter of fact, based on what we know right now, the story goes like this. I, as a Hungarian taxpayer, and 10 million other Hungarians, we actually give 2 billion euros to the Chinese to build a campus to the Chinese for a university to be run by Fudan University, to be run by the Chinese side. That's really strange. And just to give it a twist, actually, we give that money to the Chinese in a way that we take a loan from China. You know, the very typical Belt and Road Initiative model that China covers 85%, 80 to 85% of the expenditure of building the university, but of course we have to repay it, both the interest rate and the down payment, the capital. So at the very end of the day, Hungarian taxpayers give a huge and enormous campus to the Chinese side, plus we pay interest rate to the Chinese bank financing the whole project. And that is something I never heard of. Actually, a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with Times Higher Education, and I asked them, have you ever heard about a story like that, that the host country builds a brand new enormous campus to an incoming university? And they never heard about such a case study before. So that is very strange. And just to give you a final number before I stop talking, I already mentioned that they plan to have 6,000 master level students. And compared to that, the total size of the university would be 500,000 square meters. That is twice as big as the biggest Hungarian university, what has 30,000 students. So nobody can really explain why Fudan would need such an extremely big university. My university has 14,000 students, and we have 50,000 square meters property size. So that would be 10 times bigger than my university, and it's something we cannot really comprehend. There are some gossips about the reasons of this financial arrangement in the country, but well, you know, I wouldn't like to go into details. I think if you read a bit about Hungary, and if you have been paying attention to Hungarian domestic politics, you may have some clues what the real reason might be behind this financial solution. Thank you.
Tamás, thanks for giving us such a deep expose of events on the ground as you see them, particularly as I know you may have to drop off at any moment now. You know, I want to bring together the three different experiences that we heard from our speakers today. And the one comment I would make is that there was once a time in which the controversies that we're seeing today were not at the forefront of China-EU, China V4 education cooperation dialogues. This is a relatively recent phenomenon that we can peg to, you know, recent developments in China's rise, its growing role in the world. And furthermore, what we're seeing today is just one snapshot of the education cooperation picture. There are the sort of, you know, the research dialogues, the workshops, the, you know, to a lesser extent, the Confucius Institutes that are less contentious, you know, primarily because they revolve around education, cultural education, which is, you know, comparatively less controversial. So what the point I'm trying to make here, having heard all three of you speak, is that this is a new challenge that education scholars in the China field need to grapple with, and policymakers too. I now want to bring the attention back to our two other speakers, Dominik and Andrea, and ask, you know, Andrea, Dominik, you spoke about the cooperation in your countries that you look at, that you observe as starting from a low base. I mean, would you expect a similar reaction, you know, to occur if a similar proposal by a similar Chinese university were put to, you know, to the governments in your country? Because it's important to bear in mind that V4 countries aren't homogenous in this regard. Yet they have different dynamics with China. The relationships are slightly different. So when we think about Hungary and Fudan and Budapest, would similar controversies, do we think, occur in other parts of the V4? Dominik, I see that you've turned your camera back on, and I wonder if
right.
You could get, yeah.
Well, to be honest, the answer is very simple: no. Because Polish politics, domestic politics, is slightly driven by pro-American position. Because we face a big challenge from Russia. So we see the United States as security provider to our country, and also Western European countries like Germany. You know, we are the middle power in Central Europe between Western Europe and Russia. So definitely this is the first. The second, I think the rule of law in Poland is still more, you know, in practice, I would say, than in some Central European countries. And Polish politics is still, you know, highly influenced by opposition parties, I would say. Still, we have law and justice, as you know, but definitely this controversies might also stimulate against law and justice party sentiments. And probably in the next elections, they might lose the elections. So they're really calculating everything. But as I said, priority is given to NATO, to security concerns. And that's my answer. But one thing, if I may refer to what was said by Tamás, thank you for this. You said your students were disappointed with listening to liberal thoughts about the economy in China. And this is a Chinese problem. Because what can China offer to the external audience in terms of social sciences? We cannot repeat, old-fashioned Ian Fu, for example, the scholars from late 19th century. But for now, at least from my perspective, we have Justin Lin Fu, right, who is like a dominant economist in Beijing. But from the perspective of social sciences, this is the question. What can China offer to us as a very different approach from Western scholars? This is a big question mark. And my point is that simply China cannot offer a lot contribution to development of social sciences. Of course, they are really keen to talk about technology. What Chinese colleagues told to me, Dominik, we are very strong in hard power. But when it comes to soft power, we have a lot of shortages there. So this is the point. And from my perspective, from perspective of my students, also about soft power, just to answer the Peter question here, if I may take this question now. So we send a lot of students to China. 1 year, 2 year scholarship, a very interesting, a very, very important cooperation, nice scholarships for students, but then they see realities. And just imagine you yourself as a student in China that is asked to upload or download surveillance application. And this charm offensive runs away. That's the end of the story. And then they talked to me and they said, Dominik, we are sorry. Your China is not our China. Because I was a student in Jiang's the meantime. So it was totally different China. And nowadays it's totally different China. So talking about this kind of a charm offensive soft power in education sector, two things are important. Lack of social theories, a kind of a new approaches. And the second is how they treat students in China. And I stop here.
Really interesting to hear that actually the educational offering is not that different to what you might get at a typical European or American university even. And I'm presuming that's because, Chinese academics are very international themselves. They study in the West and conduct their research there as well. So really interesting. Andrea, I want to turn to you. You've got your camera turned on again. What say you?
I just say goodbye.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Bye-bye. Bye. I got to go.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tamás. Thanks.
Bye-bye. It was good to see you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there was a lot said that, I can't but agree. I can only add several other comments from my perspective. And also, following up on Dominik and sort of soft power, through education. China is terrible at soft power. It really is not it's just not good at that. And I'm always a little bit cautious, when we somehow, I think, do ourselves a disservice, when we, brand all Chinese students as spies and we, brand Fudan University and potential Fudan University in Budapest as a party school, There's a lot of, I think in my country, there's a lot of really biased old ideas about what China's like, really prejudiced old ideas about Confucianism and Marxism, and they're true to some extent, but, I think that we are only beginning to assess risks for really what they are and how we should do that. So we're really at the beginning. To your question, whether there could be a similar university, offshore campus of Chinese university in Prague or another Czech city, absolutely not. I can't absolutely not see that, to be honest. There are huge reputational risks these days for any university who wants to do large-scale projects with China. Universities are having a lot of cooperation with China, but they are treading quite cautiously these days. They really, trying to take into account what is happening in China, and what is happening in China in the academic sphere is sad. Okay, I mean it's shrinking. The space for academic debate and freedom of speech has really shrunk, you know, in social sciences and humanities. I'm not talking about natural sciences. This is a different story, much more international, much more well connected to the world and so on. But in social sciences, and I assume most of us are in this room, are social scientists. I mean, the picture inside China is really quite, you know, not, we are too happy to see. The number of topics that are considered sensitive is constantly increasing, and it's becoming really quite difficult to, you know, cooperate on social science topics. I mean, that's just, I mean, it's my experience, but I think it's the experience of most of us, you know, it's just becoming really very hard. And, you know, I think there is also a difference to what Chinese students are learning, or foreign students are learning in an English taught class in China, and what Chinese students are learning in a Chinese taught class in a Chinese degree program. I think that, you know, they're different, and there's surveillance in the classroom, you know, they are textbooks checking, you know, and so on. And this was not the case, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. So, I mean, the sphere in China is changing, and in my point of view, not in a very positive direction. But so that's the China part, but there's also the domestic part. You know, the public is really scrutinizing a lot of what you're doing with China these days. And there's huge reputational risks for you if you do something that the public is not going to view in a favorable way. And the public is really not in favor of China right now. Not in my country, and not in most other European countries either. So, you know, so it's much more strongly even than in Budapest. And that is why I cannot imagine actually having a foreign campus of a Chinese university in Prague. Although, having said that, I want to add a couple of things. Hungary actually has had a relatively liberalized for international, in higher education, international players of a field. There's been a couple of foreign campuses in Hungary, of US universities, most famously Central European University, CEU, but also others. I myself worked for a French business school that had a campus in Budapest, okay? And I was there on a visit, I think 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and I asked, how many foreign campuses are there in Budapest? I think around 10. So, you know, in the Czech Republic, I don't know if this is a regulatory issue, because it's not that easy to set up a campus in another country. Okay, it's very, like, higher education is very tightly regulated. Who's going to give a degree? What's going to be on the degree? Administration is very heavy in this field. So we in the Czech Republic also have some foreign players, private universities. Okay, so they're not public, they're private universities. NYU has a campus in NYU Prague. There are some other US universities, but apart from that, nothing. China, on the other hand, has invested a lot in its higher education sector. I mean, the infrastructures, I think all of you, you know, if you have recently visited any Chinese campus or have been visiting Chinese campuses, you might have noticed that, you know, they really have grown infrastructures like mushrooms, super new campuses, incredible, you know, like campuses that European universities can only dream of, you know, in terms of the physical infrastructures, okay? And as a result, they've also started to expand abroad. So again, if you take it from this Chinese development of Chinese higher education, this, you know, Fudan University in Hungary is I guess, a natural consequence of that policy, you know, going global, you know. I mean, it's at the very beginning, but Xiamen University has a campus in Malaysia. Peking University has an offshoot of its business schools in Oxford. So we are probably going to be seeing more and more, but different forms of cooperation of Chinese actors abroad, okay? Back to the Fudan. I mean, I think Tamás has already mentioned that, and everybody can read those documents. It's quite well documented. The strategic cooperation agreement that set the framework conditions for this campus is online in English, and it makes for a very interesting read, especially, as Tamás has said, because it's really phrased in a very almost megalomaniac kind of way that I really cannot see happening. So not only can I see happening in Prague, in Czech Republic, I also cannot see happening in Hungary in the way it's currently being formed in that strategic cooperation agreement. And if, you know, it's not if something like this was supposed to happen, there would be a huge corruption risk, huge financial risk for Hungary. So I hope that the way it's specified now in the framework agreement wouldn't really happen, because it's a really large scale project. And just think about your own university. Think about the infrastructure that you have there, the buildings, the roads, the signposts, the swimming pools, the gyms, you know, all the infrastructure that is around. It's not that easy to build a campus, okay? There's a lot of hard, physical infrastructure that you need to build. And there's also a lot of soft infrastructure that you need to build. Administration, curricula, design, degrees especially, okay? It's not just that Fudan University can walk into, or any university can walk into another country and start, educating there. It doesn't work like that. There are accreditation committees, there are rectors' conferences, there's Ministry of Education. What is interesting that in the cooperation agreement of Fudan, Hungary, it was not the Ministry of Education who signed it. It was the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, not the Ministry of Education. So, there's a lot of players and it's a very complex situation. And I can't see it really in such a large scale manner. I really can't see it happening in anywhere right now. I don't think the Chinese universities have that kind of, experience in running operations. As I think that was already mentioned before, there are some players inside China, okay? So there are UK universities in China, a couple, American universities in China. They have been running operations there for years, sometimes for decades, such as Johns Hopkins and Nanjing University since the 80s, okay? There's a lot of experience there. But one crucial difference, when we go to China, when a Western country or whatever country goes to China, wants to start a campus there, they need a Chinese partner to do it with, okay? So in this sense, the way the cooperation agreement was structured in Fudan, Hungary case, there's no reciprocity, okay? Because we couldn't just walk into China and open a campus there. But the way it was phrased here is that this is actually what would happen. Fudan would just walk into Hungary, establish a company, it would be a private university, a foundation, and work, as an actor like this. So there really is no reciprocity here. And I think that's another crucial difference and crucial problem.
Thanks, Andrea. What I'm hearing from you is that, politics and, education benefits or disbenefits aside, there's a huge financial dimension and fiscal dimension we need to consider, and questions around reciprocity. Is the relationship fair? This is hugely interesting. And right now in the conversation, I get the sense that we're looking at the debate right now through the lens of Chinese institutions coming to coming to Europe, coming to V4 countries. We know, however, that that's only just part of the equation. Chinese students also make that journey to come here too. And I want to just sort of broaden the conversation out to that side of things too. And, I saw Gregor Bauer in the chat box ask two questions that focus on that side of things. And Gregor, if you'd be happy to, would you be willing to put your question to your speakers? One of the two, if possible.
Sure, I'll do my best. First of all, thanks for the very insightful discussion this far. And I was exactly interested in what are maybe China's motivations for engagement in education as well, not just what do V4 countries gain, but bringing this to sort of the level of students. What makes V4 countries particularly attractive? How do V4 countries distinguish themselves within Europe? What can attract Chinese students, or does it? Or maybe if we recognize that educational cooperation is a positive, what can we do to make the V4 region more attractive to Chinese students, right? So not just that, but also maybe what specific challenges do Chinese students face maybe in that region compared to the rest of Europe? And it's, to both speakers, maybe to Andrea as well, since you're now based in Berlin, if you see any strong differences between in your experience, maybe with Chinese students or with the institutions, but either way to both.
Well, so to be honest, Dominik had his camera on, so I didn't want to intercept. If Dominik wanted to chime in first, then please. It's difficult for V4 to attract.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
All right, it's quite difficult. It depends on your national higher education policy, okay? But for example, Germany is in Germany and in Finland, for example, education is for free. In Germany, you have to pay some sort of fee, for a semester, but the tuition fee is quite low and the support is quite high. Whereas in Finland, also higher education is completely for free. Czech Republic, however, has higher education for free only if it is in Czech, So that is also why the largest portion of our international student body, and we have a large international student body, 50,000 students out of 300,000 students are foreigners in the Czech Republic. So a large international student body, but most of them come from Slovakia, they come from Russia, they come from Ukraine. So Slovaks can just study in Czech straight away, right? Russians and Ukrainians, they do a 1-year preparatory course in Czech, and then they just study in Czech. And there are also other countries, now Indians, Arab countries, name it, but a lot of the people, in order to avoid the tuition fee, would need to first spend 1 year learning Czech and then do the classes in Czech. So, that's why it's kind of difficult actually. But however, we have become much more attractive than we used to be. Why? Because we have high quality education, and some students, brackets, their parents, don't mind paying the tuition fee. We have a very beautiful environment, right? I mean, Prague is absolutely stunning city, right? But also other Czech towns, they're really beautiful, very well developed, very flourishing, right? In terms of culture, in terms of everything. They're very safe as well. So this has been the point that's really kind of a good seller in China. It's very safe, yeah. And I mean, the challenges are also, in my very personal experience, is that we are a very homogeneous society. There's not a lot of foreigners living, especially not of different ethnicities in our countries. I mean, Czech Republic has a sizable Vietnamese community. That's true, but Chinese, not so much. So people don't have that much experience simply with, people from other cultures. And the Chinese students, they have certain, I mean, we all know that, right? I mean, I don't want to, put some stereotypes in, but it's actually true. Chinese students have often very difficult time to make local friends, right? I mean, they have this kind of in-group behavior, and they stick together and cook Chinese meals. And this, not everybody, of course, I don't want to generalize. But for example, when we tried to put Chinese students in our Czech dorms, to intermingle, somehow it happened that, there was a separation of cultures anyway, and it took months, sometimes years, to break it through, So there's a lot of work that we have to do, that the student services need to do, that the universities need to do to Chinese students, but also to any other students from Africa, from Russia, and from many other countries, right? To make it really global. And, we often don't have the capacity to do that, I mean, so it's an element of racism there as well. A lot of Czech people just are not really used to people from other cultures, and they find it just, there are a lot of, as I said, a lot of really prejudiced, biased ideas about what Chinese people are, and the lack of capacity to make the differentiation between Chinese government, Chinese party, and Chinese people. And this, in particular, makes me often quite sad, when I see that sort of played out in practice, because I think we have a beautiful country and great universities. And, I'm really happy when we have foreign students from anywhere in the world, okay, not just China, to come and experience that. And I think it's really important experience for us as well. But we're still in the process, right? Because we are latecomers, and we don't have enough capacity in terms of financial resources, in terms of human resources. We're small countries. So, we're getting there, and we've made huge progress, but there's still a lot of work to do, a lot of space for improvement.
If I might just have my 2 cents to this. Well, opening a campus in China is not only about Chinese regulations, but also about Central European countries' resources to do this. I mean, Nottingham did a campus in Ningbo. Colleagues from Nottingham, even China Center works there, and it's like that. I mean, we don't have history with China like Great Britain has, for example. But let me just briefly refer to the issue how to differentiate or distinguish itself from between us within V4 or even the whole region. The problem is the narratives in China about Eastern Europe, not Central Europe, are mainly because we belong to one camp in the past. So it's pretty difficult to persuade Chinese public opinion to see this region via different countries or even via V4. They see the whole region as one body, post-socialist transformation. And that's it. And as was said, tuition fee is, I think, critical issue. And definitely we don't have students, for example, at our university and mainly in Poland, from big cities in China. We have students from, from central China, like Henan province or Hunan province. We don't have students from the rich areas from mainland, because they know that once they have money, they can, pay tuition fee in Great Britain or United States, and have better diploma from, Cambridge University, etc. So definitely our target, from my perspective, should be at least in Central Europe. And let me tell you a story. Once I traveled to Beijing via Kiev, Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine, and it was 10 years ago something. And it was the end of June, like exactly this day, 10 years ago or 11 years ago. And I saw a lot of young people on a plane, and I asked them, why the hell are traveling back from Ukraine? We're the student. The tuition fee is lower than in China, and there are no quotas. This is also about China's domestic higher education system. If you are from a central province, you cannot enter a university in Beijing, because there are quotas for one in every province in China. So the limitations also push them to study abroad. So from our perspective, of course, we need to recognize this, but it's pretty difficult to distinguish ourselves from like Hungary from Czech Republic from Poland and Slovakia and so on and so forth, because Chinese sees the region as a one basket, as one body. And that's my points here. Thank you.
It seems that whether it's at the institutional level, at the university level, for example, or at the student level, and whether or not it's institutions and students going eastwards or going westwards, there are some serious anxieties, serious concerns, serious shortcomings. And as we look towards the end, as we near the end of this chat today, I'm wondering if I can turn the conversation towards looking to the future and thinking about steps, because Dominik, Andrea, both of you not just work in this, but you both to a certain degree live it. You live in this. So assuming that the Minister for Education for Czech Republic or for Poland is listening in on our chat today, what would be the recommendation here? What is the advice here that you would give from the ground up the command chain, so to speak? Because we've covered a whole host of issues today, I see another question from Peter. We'll get to that if we can, but for now, I wonder if I can turn to Andrea to have a first stab at that question as we wind down.
I would say, if the Czech Minister of Education was right here, I would say pay more attention to China, pay more attention to what's going on in China, sharpen up your conceptualization skills, do not put everything in the same basket, but be aware of the risks, and collaborate more with other European countries in exchanging experience and sharing knowledge. Because there is a lot that's going on in Germany, France, Nordic countries, you name it. But it's also a matter of lack of sort of inter-European knowledge sharing. Yeah.
Andrea, they seem incredibly common sense recommendations to me. Dominik, over to you.
From my perspective, I would say that, networks are critical. And if I just advise the Minister of Education, I would say that, we need more education, higher education networks, but in social sciences. And let me refer to my previous point about, the very low level of China's social sciences. Probably it's because of the language barrier. People who can speak, Chinese, as I can speak Chinese. And I remember my postdoc in Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And I was really happy to talk, for example, to Zhao Dingyang, a big figure, a big philosopher who wrote extensively about Tianxia Guan, about all under the heaven concept. And I learned a lot. But definitely, the core here, at least from a scholarship perspective, is to know the language and they approach Chinese. Try to bypass all these institutional dimensions, because we all know that we need big agreements, we need big figures, but then we need to practice a cooperation, a higher education cooperation that is really based, according to me, on networks and a relationship with Chinese partners. So that's my advice. Andrea.
I cannot but fully agree. I would also add one more thing, and that is, I fully agree with you, Dominik. I would also add that the whole sector of higher education is in massive state of uncertainty. Okay, every officer in every university in the world is really asking themselves, okay, what are, we have learned to cope with COVID. We have learned to, we've adapted, but everyone's trying to still figure out what's going to be next. Okay, and how the future of higher education is going to look like. So we also need to be mindful of this, that we will have, and especially when it comes to China, all foreign students who were studying in China are not in China, right? China is closed, super restricted. It's very difficult to get there. And this is probably going to take maybe 1 more year. Okay. And in relation to what Dominik just said, networks really are crucial. And that's something that the Chinese are very good at, the diaspora. This is, by the way, also our information about V4 and our university spread through diaspora networks, through students who had studied in the Czech Republic or Poland or Hungary, and now we're going to have a gap, of a couple of years when this will not be possible, and we're really risking losing access, number one, because of China, because especially in social sciences, cooperation is becoming very difficult. Number two, because of COVID. Number three, because of the combination of China and COVID and the very tough travel restrictions that are there. We're really risking this access, and as a result, losing the networks, So, and as a result, losing the expertise, that as a region, we've only recently begun to build up. So, yeah, I hope that, we will learn how to cope with that in a smart way, in a sustainable way, in a very sharp, conceptualized way. Yeah.
I try and take an optimistic view, Andrea. I like to think that the globalization and the intermingling of different education systems, education approaches, education institutions isn't going to stop. I hope it doesn't. I mean, I speak as someone who has benefited hugely from this globalized world in which I can tap into different pools of learning from the West, from the East. And, Dominik speaks of networks. You outlined a host of different, policy strategy level responses that I hope, that sound to me like really great responses that can keep that multiplicity, if I can use that word, multiplicity of pools of learning open to generations to come. I really hope so. So thanks for your recommendations. We're just under 10 minutes away from time, and in the spirit of trying to give every question in the chat box its time in the spotlight, I'm gonna call upon Peter to ask the last question for the day. It's about Confucius Institutes, another sharp point in the discussion around V4 China education cooperation. Peter, if you're willing, would you be happy to put your question orally to our speakers?
Sure, yes. Thank you so much for the amazing discussion. I really learned a lot even until now. And so this discussion of Confucius Institutes came to my mind that, there were a lot of claims of China using sharp power through Confucius Institutes. These institutes were closed in the US, some of them in Australia. But we are still on the rising side, I think, here, at least in Hungary, that we are still opening them. So how do you see this question? Yes, so how do you see the role of Confucius Institutes and this question of sharp power? And also, given that there seems to be this reorganization of Hamban and the whole structure at the moment, what changes would you see, or what do you think? Where will this whole issue or question of the institutes evolve in the future? Thank you to both of you.
Okay, just briefly. I mean, I am speaking from a higher education policy type of perspective, but of course, higher education goes and should go hand in hand with foreign policy and overall, policy agenda. CIs, I don't know much about CIs, Confucius Institutes. What I do know, again, from a higher education perspective, they're actually trilateral agreements, okay, between the host university, the Chinese university, and Hanban. And as you say, there's now been some restructuring, so actually it has a different name now and whatnot. But I think really the core is staying. this is what it is, okay? And that's also where I think the controversy comes from, because similar, you know, cultural institutes like Goethe Institute and so on, they are not inter-university arrangements, you know? So I think that's really what's special about the CIs. And as you mentioned, despite the closures, some of them have been closed because agreements have not been renewed. Some of them have been closed because they've been badly managed, and so on. I mean, there's a lot of diversity inside Confucius Institutes. Also, from what I've seen some CIs being really well run and really, you know, providing some space for example, language learning that is otherwise not there. If you're going to close the CI, you need to substitute it with something so that kids have the chance of learning Chinese, you know. In the Czech Republic, I'm aware of two. And there is a CI at Palacký University in Olomouc, a regional student town, very strong university, old, great. And there's recently also been one in Prague, but there's been always a huge controversy around it. So it's operating kind of a bit of a under the radar, you know. So, and I also think that's something, you know, to do with what you mentioned, the reorganization. I mean, the fact that it's reorganized, I think doesn't really tackle the core. I think that the structure, the main idea behind is still the same. And of course, the idea is, you know, to spread cultural influence. I think that's fairly okay to say. And I think, you know, I don't want to evaluate that really. What I do want to say as my last point is that when you look at the origins of Chinese higher education, they also have European roots and European colonial roots. For example, Tongji University was started by German doctors in cooperation with the German Consul General back then in Shanghai. And as you know, in Shanghai at that time, at the very late period of the late Qing Empire, before the empire broke down, was competing colonial interests, okay, of France. France also had a university in Shanghai, which later on, the president of that university, a Jesuit Catholic French university, resigned from that university and became the president of Fudan University, okay? And that university, the French university, was called Zhendam. There's a connection there, okay? A really famous Chinese educator of that period, Jesuit priest, okay? So even in the kind of traces of European higher education in China, you can see the alliance between foreign policy interests and higher education. So that's it for me from today. Thanks.
Well, it's a big issue. I mean, Confucius Institutes, you know, in Poland, we don't see kind of a sharp power approach taken by people from Confucius Institutes. And as Andrea mentioned, I think a case-by-case approach should be taken here. We have different conditions in the United States. We have different conditions in Sweden, for example. And it's part of the overall China policy of the given country. So definitely it should be also discussed case by case. We should not make a very general observation about all Confucius Institute across the world. In Poland, as I said, probably because in Poland, the Confucius Institutes limit themselves to teaching Chinese, you know, organizing kind of a fancy workshops about Chinese cuisine. And from this perspective, also Polish side don't take a very sensitive issues like human rights, you know, Uyghur status in China and so on and so forth. So, you know, to be honest, if both sides know the red line, everything goes right. And I have nothing against here. However, probably in the case of some Confucius Institutes in the United States, things went a different way. So I will stop here.
I think some words of wisdom there, insofar as if as China studies students, as scholars, we're taught not to treat China as a monolith, well, maybe the same logic, should apply to its many Confucius Institutes in many different countries and contexts. Okay, it's currently 7:13 p.m. in Europe, and I think that's just about time for us to wrap up the conversation for today. I want to thank Andrea, I want to thank Dominik, and also Tamás as well for joining. The conversation, I think, is so important to be had within V4 circles, but equally, as someone that doesn't live in the region, it's so important for me and others who don't to listen in, learn, hear about what's going on, because these discussions are hugely repercussive for, for China watchers. With that being in mind, one last thank you, and enjoy the summer holidays that I hope are approaching very quickly for you all. Thanks again, and see you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.